Welcome to Black Man's Corner. Today's video is the continuation or the finalization of the series on critical race theory for beginners. I'm Joey. In part 2, in terms of critical race theory, the race part of that theory must operate from multiple definitions of racialized terms. In the book that I just happen to have here, The Nigger in You, nigger is defined this way. A so-called nigger isn't a person necessarily, but a societal problem created through society's inability to educationally engage, to successfully integrate our differences. As a result, when we label someone a nigger, beyond referring to him, her, or them as a problem, we also disrespectfully imply an expectation of behavior that at the very least borders on criminal activity, an attribute of someone whom society deems as a conundrum of sorts. We also imply that the person is a societal misfit, but in the context of society's inability to have successfully created inclusive opportunities for all its citizens. This is how the term nigger is framed within our society, and unfortunately, Black people, as well as racially underrepresented people along with it. So in terms of critical race theory, how might this apply? Perhaps it makes it more understandable how the so-called Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz was arguably seen as a problem. She essentially is the nigger in The Wizard of Oz. In that film, racially speaking, green was the new black. Perhaps some of you didn't deeply process that. Early in the movie, we see what may have become a family heirloom, the red slippers, instead become the prize of a housejacking, Oz-visiting white girl, who then feigned innocence without ever attempting to refuse wearing them. Oh, the girl's name was Dorothy. When the story is updated to more recent times, she may be named Becky or Karen. Either way, she is an accomplice to the murder of the so-called witch's sister, if not being the outright culprit herself. Viewing this tale, it is easier for some to not question or rush to judgment about the wickedness of the so-called Western witch. Perhaps some would have a different perspective if they knew more details of her life. Turned green from an accident her mom had while pregnant with her, she was never given a chance in that society. The 1939 Technicolor movie of The Wizard of Oz didn't even share her name with its audiences. So disenfranchised, green-faced Elphaba Throp did what disenfranchised, black-faced, slavery-revolting Nat Turner did, and revolted against the government of her time, ultimately setting her sights on Dorothy, Becky, Karen, for killing her sister Nessarose and jacking her shoes. In terms of critical race theory, this farcical tale contributed mightily to the action of judging a book by its cover, without any concern over the history of the racially underrepresented person or society's impact upon them. In his book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, author Derek Bell, often considered one of the originators of critical race theory, told a tale of Jason, a Black revolutionary leader who, during the process of his life being saved after an assassination attempt, falls in love with the white female doctor responsible for his survival and successful recovery. On some level, this was jungle fever before Spike Lee even conceptualized it. Everything suggests that Jason, touted as the last Black hero, could lose his constituency by appearing to sell out the movement for interracial love. An understanding of critical race theory enables those considering this racial narrative to understand that the Black revolutionary leader's allegiance to his cause is a direct result of a socialized loyalty that suggests interracial romantic love is taboo, taking a backseat to not only political responsibilities, but also the inherited ideal of loving only those who are culturally, if not racially, similar. Any action otherwise, and we may find the star-crossed lovers with a forbidden aftertaste not soon forgotten. Critical race theory arms the open-minded to move beyond this allegorical tale to imagine a world where Barack Obama, as a presidential candidate, was married to a Katy Perry type instead of Michelle Obama. How different would his presidency have been if he would have ascended to the White House at all? How would people have responded to Obama's deciding the White House needed to be repainted? White supremacists were terrified of this black man who almost broke his back bending every which way necessary to be politically inclusive. But just as professional sports owners prefer to hire in their own image, unless of course their feet are held to the fire, without realizing the indoctrinated blind spots in their choices, voters vote for candidates that some system or another has primed them for. There isn't enough racial priming that could have prepared America for a black president married to a white darling of the media, or a white woman at all. Critical race theory enables unpacking oddities like the disproportionate amount of black quarterbacks in the NFL, many who played the position in high school only to be moved to lesser high-profile leadership positions. Players like Marcus Allen and James Lofton, to name only a couple. By critically examining race within all sports, using historical lessons when available to raise consciousness, as well as preventing reoccurrences, the systems in place that contribute to these inequities can eventually be revealed and targeted for dismantling. Critical race theory offers methods to unpack the misconceptions or poorly veiled lies used to justify the unjustifiable, like how a certain black retired NBA legend, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who once was Lou Alcindor, had endless hurdles placed before him, while others sauntered, if not sashayed, into prime head coaching opportunities relatively unproven. Maybe, just maybe, it's DNA. Perhaps it is easier to believe in a Steve instead of welcoming to the team a leader like Kareem. Critical race theory, at least and at last, offers theories and practices that insist upon unpacking what often later are seen as subtle and are understated weapons in the oppressor's toolkit. Racism has never required a rocket scientist to implement it. If it did, Donald Trump would be a racist. Actually, wouldn't be a racist, though he is also an evil genius in the most stupefying ways. Trump's the neighbor that has a black jockey in his yard as a lawn statue, while still referring to black people as the blacks. After all, who hasn't seen the one sign-holding black man comfortably situated behind Trump at all his rallies, whom he continually refers to as my African American? Unbelievable. But whereas most racism is an inherited ideal, fed to us as easily as the air we breathe and water we drink, many people figure it out and denounce racism the same way they denounce the devil, while sadly, many are poverty-stricken, easily duped white folk practicing, when not encouraging, racial hatred, pathologically reframing black wealth as not good for white health, using black pride as a racial chide. Their need to have someone they can blame for their lives is so profound it is inclusively implemented towards Mexicans, framing them as illegals. Asians, framing and blaming them for a pandemic. Native Americans, or perhaps better stated, indigenous people, having successfully made them the most invisible of all the racially underprivileged subcultures within this so-called land of the free, home of the slave, while blacks remain the archenemy, if not antithesis, of whites. Critical race theory focuses on the subtle and not so subtle ways racial inequality is embedded throughout society. While critical race theory invites critical analysis of racist motives, racist bias, racial prejudice, racist animus, and individual hatred, it instead chooses to unpack racism as a social construct, necessitating a heightened level of race consciousness if racial stratification is to ever be overcome, especially considering the fact that civil rights laws and court victories have not eradicated racial injustice. So recognize critical race theory as an unabashed exploration of personal liberties and freedoms, undercut by a systemic form of racism that transcends mere individual prejudice. Boom! What you just heard was me dropping the mic, not necessarily from having brought the noise, but from the fatigue of doing this lengthy 3-part series. I hope the videos provided you more insight into critical race theory. So now, you know a little more about critical race theory. Tell a friend and enhance the collective consciousness. Always, I appreciate you joining me in Black Man's Corner. If you like the video, please like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, power to the people.